Okay, I think we're going to start the program now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Schluffman. I'm the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Committee of Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey. On behalf of all of us at the Jewish Federation, I'm pleased to welcome you to the first Trust Building Through Community Conversations event. Jewish Federation is actively working to establish relationships of trust and communications with neighboring diverse communities to address matters that are of importance and shared concern. These relationships promote understanding to build mutual respect and a sense of unity. In tonight's program, we'll explore building relationships in diverse community within our own groups and with our neighbors who we may not be that familiar with, but with whom we want to get to know better. We want to explore our similarities and see how these are more important than our unique backgrounds. To do this, we've invited two local clergy from distinct religious constituencies to share their experiences and insights. A few technical notes before we begin. You'll note that you are currently muted. That will remain true throughout the first portion of our program. Later on, you'll have your turn to speak as we enter small group conversations. You'll also have the opportunity to ask questions to our speakers by sending your questions in the Zoom chat. The full group components of this program are being recorded and will be shared through social media and in future events. The breakout rooms will not be recorded, so what you say there will not be recorded. Now I am pleased to introduce the facilitators of each of these Trust Building Through Community Conversations, Rabbi Ron Simons and Reverend Liddy Barlow. Rabbi Simons is the founding director of the Center for Loving Kindness at the Jewish Community Center of Greater Pittsburgh. And Reverend Liddy Barlow is the executive minister of Christian Associates of Southwest Pennsylvania. I've gotten to know each of them very well over the last few months while we were playing this program, and I assure you that you will learn a lot here, and they're going to be terrific. Rabbi Ron and Reverend Liddy, I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight for what we hope is going to be a meaningful program. I want to begin also by acknowledging the support of the Russell Berry Foundation. We're really grateful that the foundation brought us together from Pittsburgh to New Jersey, and we're looking forward to this series. So what we'd like to share with you is the way that we begin all of our trust building through community conversation events, both here in New Jersey and around the country, the work that we do. We have what we call a list of expectations. The first is that we hope that you, all of us, will be kind to each other, that we'll strive to treat each other as we would like to be treated. Of course, this has to do with when we're in our breakout rooms. We invite everyone to listen with curiosity, to seek a deeper understanding, and to not be afraid to ask questions when we have that opportunity. We want each of us to engage without judgment, to let go of our assumptions, and to try to see the world through someone else's eyes. We invite people also to speak with honesty, to bring our true selves and our own perspectives into this conversation, just as we ask each of us to share the floor, to make room for everyone in our dialogue. If you hear a lot of your own voice, maybe you can step back a little bit and make room for others. And if you haven't taken a turn, of course, this is when we're in the breakout rooms, to share, we invite you to step forward and to let us know what you think or to ask a question. And so to remain in this event, we ask you now to affirm these expectations. You can either raise your hand as if we were at an event together, or if you are savvy enough and know how to raise your hand using the reactions button, you can do that. And we're looking forward to a great conversation based on these expectations. Liddy?
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for all of the thumbs up and clapping and hand raising that I see on the screen. I want to introduce our featured speakers for the evening and to give them just a moment to tell us more about the places where they serve in the communities where they work. So first, Reverend Sunita Ponton is the Executive Director of Metro Community Center and the Pastor of Justice, Advocacy, and Compassion at Metro Community Church in Englewood. Reverend Ponton, we're so happy to have you as part of this program. Can you tell us a little bit more about the church and the community center?
Yes, thank you so much. Good evening to everyone, and thank you for this invitation to be with you all. It is a privilege and an honor. As Reverend Liddy just mentioned, I am at Metro Community Church, and we have a nonprofit arm that's also Metro Community Center. We were founded about 14 years ago by Pastor Peter Ahn, Reverend Peter Ahn. He still remains the senior pastor. We're a multi-ethnic congregation. It is mostly Asian, but we also do have Black, white, Latino, everyone biracial in between. And if you know anything about the Christian church, there is, Martin Luther King said it back in the 60s that 11 a.m. is probably one of the most segregated times of the week. And so Pastor Peter's vision was about creating a multi-ethnic congregation. And for us, it really means mirroring what we know from the Bible says that heaven will look like. People from every tribe, every nation, every tongue being able to gather and worship together. So that is our goal. We are located in Englewood. We do not have a building. We worship when we're not in a pandemic at Greco Elementary School. And then we have offices over on South Van Brunt Street. And then our nonprofit arm does a lot more of our community engagement. So we run mostly youth programs, our mentoring program, our summer arts camp, and our basketball program. So thank you for having me.
Great, thanks so much. And we are also joined this evening by Rabbi Chaim Pupko. He's the senior rabbi of Congregation Ahavath Torah in Englewood. Welcome, Rabbi Pupko. Can you take a turn telling us a little bit about your congregation?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me for doing this program. And thank you so much to Reverend Ponton for participating. Our shul, believe it or not, is a very old synagogue, 126 years old. It's been here in this location in Englewood since the early 60s. We're a modern Orthodox congregation, which means that we observe the laws of the Torah as interpreted by the rabbis. We're Saturday Sabbath observant, which means that we all end up living within walking distance of the synagogue, which creates a real sense of community, a real cohesiveness, and a certain insularity that is both a blessing and a challenge. We have a strong sense of identity and commitment, and at the same time, we need to actively look for ways to connect with people outside of our community. On the one hand, as modern Orthodox Jews, you see that we dress like everybody else, and we go to college, and we have professions. But at the same time, because we're Orthodox, we're in a little bit of a more insular community. And so being here in Englewood, all of our members live right around the congregation. But which is why I'm so excited to participate in a program like this, because I really want to find more opportunities like this to connect with people outside of our community.
Wonderful. Well, let's get started. And so, in keeping with those introductions, we thought that the best way to begin would be to actually have a conversation about what diversity looks like in each of your own communities, in each of your own houses of worship. You actually started that conversation for us, but we'll go a bit deeper. Reverend Ponton, why don't you begin? And I'm so intrigued that you brought in the Martin Luther King quote that Sunday mornings at 11, right, is the most segregated time of the week. Can you tell us how Metro Community does that differently?
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard. So I think one of the ways we do it is by being intentional about it. We strive really hard in our leadership as well as in our congregation to make sure that everyone feels comfortable, everyone feels loved. If you come to our church, you will see a majority Asian population. I think that has a lot to do with our senior pastor, our founding pastor being Asian. He is Korean. But he has made it his personal mission to make sure that he is building bridges across ethnicities. And that is how he ministers to the congregation. That is an expectation of the congregation. And we celebrate those ethnic differences, right? So again, when we're not in a pandemic, we have something called Cultural Day, which really highlights, we really want to celebrate where people are from, right? We believe that God made us distinct, right? Our ethnicities, our languages, all those things are important to our identity, and they were intentional when God created us. And so we celebrate those things. And so you'll see not only ethnic diversity, but you'll also see diversity in how people were raised, regions of the country, regions of the world. We have both first generation and second generation people from all over the world, but then also their religious backgrounds. Most people grew up in some sort of Christian background, but what that looked like was different. People come from different faith traditions. And some people come from no faith at all, having just found faith maybe through Metro Community Church. And so all those things are important to us, and all those things we really celebrate. And one of the things that you will hear very often at Metro is that our commonality is found in our brokenness. That we have all experienced pain, we have all experienced heartache, we have all experienced hurt in our lives. And we all struggle with what the Bible calls sin. And so can we find our commonalities there and work together from that location, so that when I see you, I identify myself and I can see myself in you. And we work from that place that everyone is welcome. And, and it's not perfect. It always bumps up against one another, right? We have difficult conversations. What I always like to tell people is please just stay at the table. As difficult as it is, please just stay at the table. And we wrestle through it, but I think we do it well, and we wrestle together as a family.
Beautiful. Thank you, Reverend. So, Rabbi Pupko, keeping all of that in mind about Metro Community Church, let's put that aside for a second and just give us a glimpse into Ahavas Torah and what does diversity mean at Ahavas Torah?
So just to be very maybe blunt or very, to me, when I hear about the diversity in Metro, so I immediately think, my congregation is far less diverse, at least in that sense. We don't have the same kind of racial and ethnic diversity. Nevertheless, what I realized, though, is that, first of all, we're a large congregation. We have almost 800 families. And by definition, there's a certain diversity within that, because while many synagogues, specifically Orthodox synagogues, have kind of broken off into smaller synagogues, we've been able to maintain a lot of people under one roof by having different services. There's different communities within a community. And I think our diversity, which again is not the same, but stems from the fact that we have a wide array of people. We have every demographic represented in terms of strongly represented in terms of age groups, the backgrounds. Maybe in some other synagogues, people all come from more religious backgrounds. In our synagogue, we have a little bit more of a diversity. Also, specifically, we have a very strong Sephardic community within the community. Jews that come from around the Mediterranean basin and North Africa. And so, that actually creates, certain opportunities where we need to understand things better and learn how to navigate the traditions and the cultures that come from different backgrounds.
Thank you. So now why don't we just allow the two of you to just say what surprises you about what you just heard, what you just learned about each other?
Well, I'm very surprised because I don't think I think about the diversity within Judaism. And I think that that's something that, as an outsider looking in, everyone sort of looks the same, right? And so I never took that into account, right? I never took into account people's backgrounds, the denominations. I'm just still learning more and more about the different denominations within Judaism, and taking that into consideration, because I do think in the world we label diversity as usually just ethnic, right? And usually racially ethnic. And so what surprised me most is really hearing about the differences in the backgrounds and the tensions that might come up because of that.
Yeah. In terms of being surprised, so I've had opportunities to speak with Reverend Ponton and to hear about her congregation and Metro. I think, I don't know if I would call it a surprise, but one thing that really caught my ear that Reverend Ponton was talking about was the way in which she framed the values that exist in diversity. I was giving a talk about Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of England who passed away recently. And in some of his writings, he talks about how God created the world with diversity by design. It's not a design flaw, it's a design. And when the world became too monolithic at the Tower of Babel, God specifically scattered people and gave them different languages, not to give them challenges, but to give them opportunities to make different contributions and to make stronger connections. And so, hearing the way Reverend Ponton was framing diversity, really reminded me of that very, very important idea. Diversity is not a challenge. Diversity is an opportunity to create even stronger bonds.
So before I hand it over to Liddy, I'll just say that book of Rabbi Sacks's, is it The Blessing of Diversity or The Blessing of Difference? I think
Dignity of Difference.
Dignity of Difference, right? It's one of my favorite books, and I quote it all the time. So thank you for sharing that.
So I want to encourage us to zoom out a little bit from our own congregational contexts and to think about the diverse, wider communities that each of these congregations is set into. And I'm curious about how your tradition, Jewish or Christian, kind of informs your understanding of the diversity in your wider community, of the fact that others are worshiping in settings that are quite different from yours. Like how does your faith and tradition help you to wrap your head around the wide array of different folks within our communities? So, Chaim, we'll let you start this time.
Thank you. As you were framing the question, all I could think about was, there's the difference between universalism and particularism, and it might be a little bit counterintuitive, but I've always felt that to the extent that a person has a strong sense of their own identity, allows them to connect with others. When we start trying to gloss over or erase our differences towards some sort of universal identity, everyone gets lost. It's only when we have a good sense of our own unique identity, which is why I believe, it's my divine obligation, it's my divine mandate that I maintain my Jewish identity so that I can connect with others. God doesn't want me to be like somebody else. God wants me to sanctify his name in this world, to be a light unto the nations. I can only do that if I have my own sense of identity. So I really think, when we talk about, diversity beyond our community, it's only successsul if we have a sense of who we are, and the people we're talking to have a sense of they are. There's this famous rabbinic idea, if I am I, because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then we can talk. It's when we both can appreciate our own identities and how we're different, then we can connect.
I love that, because it's honoring how God has made each one of us differently, and uniquely and purposefully. I love that. I think from the Christian tradition, I think a lot of it springs from, the Good Samaritan story that some of us may have heard oftentimes repeated. And, the question begins, with a lawyer asking Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life, right? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I love the question that the lawyer asked, because he asked, who is my neighbor? And I think that speaks to, and in this story, Jesus tells the story of a man who's been robbed and left for dead, and the priest passed him by, the Levite passed him by, and here comes the Samaritan who helps him. And in that story, I think the two things that always stick out to me is, one, that Jesus calls us as Christians to intentionally reach across ethnicities and cultures and historic hostilities and sort of all those things that our histories might tell us would keep us apart. But actually, we are supposed to actually reach beyond those things. And everyday people can do that, right? It doesn't require leadership. It doesn't require, a big mandate. Everyone can do it. The second thing it highlights, I think, is sort of our human tendency to want to know what is the least amount of work that I can do to, to be considered good, right? Or to get the A, or to check the box that I'm a good Christian, whatever it is. And Jesus says, like, no, it's not about doing the least, it's about doing the most. And so I think for us as Christians, it really comes from this sense that we are called to go out, that we are called to be salt and light in the world, and to intentionally be that person. Right. And it doesn't require, fanfare. It requires us to just be who God is calling us to be, and honoring that, and knowing that it stems from our love of God and our love of our neighbor, but I always love that story.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories too. And I think one thing that always has struck me about that story is that, the lawyer in the story asks, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus's question at the end of the parable is, who was a neighbor? So he shifts the neighbor from being a noun, this sort of group of others, into making neighbor the verb, and making neighbor be what we do to each other. And yeah, it's a favorite. Ron, over to you.
I'll just say that in my relationship with Liddy, that's one of the best things she's ever taught me, is that neighbor is not a noun, it's a verb, and it comes from the Christian Bible. And I really appreciate that. So, Sunita, let's go into the world that we live in now. When we began to prepare this, knowing the demographics of Metro Community Church, we wanted to have a conversation with you to offer you the opportunity to talk about what impact the anti-Asian sentiment, the anti-Asian violence, the anti-Asian death in America has put on the church. And you talked about all of us being broken, right, from a theological point of view. And here we are just 24 hours after yet again another young Black man is dead in the greater Minneapolis area. And that just, I mean, hearing the press conference today was really hard, because there was such raw emotion there, and a bunch of other things. How does all that impact you and the church body and the church and the community in its diversity?
Great question. It hits hard. I think that for many ethnic minorities, violence or hatred, it's not individual, it's group, right? So if a Black man in Minneapolis is shot and killed, he's not just an individual. He is representative of Black men in other cities across the country who face that same fear. And the same thing with when women are killed in Atlanta, Asian women are killed in Atlanta, it hits hard for Asian communities in New Jersey as well. I think for a lot of ethnic minorities, we don't see our experiences as individuals, because we don't always experience the world as individuals. And the world doesn't always meet us as individuals, right? We're met as part of this like larger ethnic group. I think it's been extremely hard for us. There's been a lot of grief. There's been a lot of confusion. There's been a lot of pain and heartache and anger and frustration. And as the church, we are called to make sense of the world. Karl Barth, theologian, says you need to have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other hand, because we are called to make sense of the world. And how do you make sense of hatred? And we have to name it as sin. We have to name it for what it is. And we have to speak to that and wrestle with the fact that this is the world in which we live, and we can't be quiet about it. So Metro has taken a very aggressive stance, in my opinion, compared to some other churches, to say that this is wrong, and we will always name it as sinful and wrong, and we will always do what we can to be a part of making it right. So we have internal conversations about race, and we have external conversations about race. And we try as hard as possible to show up for one another and to show up for marginalized communities. We don't always get it right, but we strive for that because we do believe that, and this, we talked about this a little bit earlier, that each one of us is made in the image of God. And to the extent that one person is killed because of their ethnicity or how people respond to that killing as a byproduct of their ethnicity tarnishes the image of God in that person and in that community. And we believe that God is a God of justice, and he tells us to take care of those who are oppressed. And we can't participate in right worship if we are not also working towards justice in our communities. And as a church, it's the internal work of helping heal communities, helping heal people from the trauma that they experience from that, but it's also being an external sort of prophetic voice in the community for people.
Thank you so much. Yeah, these are such challenging times, and I really appreciate your voice and the voices of your community in seeking to make it right and seeking to make the world better. Rabbi Pupko, it occurs to me that one of the terrible things that our community here in Pittsburgh and the communities of northern New Jersey have in common is that both of these communities have faced anti-Semitic acts of violence over these last few years. And I'm curious about how the centuries of anti-Semitic violence impact your community's understanding and wrestling with other forms of bias and hate that are experienced by other groups across the communities.
A very important question, and one that I think we're still working on. I don't think there is an answer, from my community to that question. I can tell you how we're going about struggling with that question. We're just a couple days after Yom HaShoah, which is the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and that's a week after Passover. These are days in which we don't just remember, suffering that the Jewish people experienced. It's not just remembering, but it's remembering in order to take action. I like to tell people that in biblical Hebrew, and really even in modern Hebrew, there's no word for history. The Hebrew word for history is historia, which is just the English word for history. There was a famous professor of Jewish history who made this observation that in biblical Hebrew, in traditional Hebrew, we refer to zachor, which is to remember, as opposed to history, because history is something that is constantly informing the present. History really goes, it informs our very identity. Who are we? We are a people that were redeemed from Egypt. We are a people that lived in the land of Israel and were exiled. We are a people that faced religious persecution in so many different places in the exile. And so, for us to reckon with anti-Semitic attacks, obviously, they're painful and they're immediate. And they also come embedded with this historical significance. And I think for a community like ours, living in America today, we're at a very strange moment in history for American Jews, for American Orthodox Jews, because on the one hand, we're a religious minority, but so many of us are Caucasian, for lack of a better term, and many of us have benefited from that. Whatever discrimination we experienced, earlier in the 20th century, many of us were able to overcome that and have established ourselves. So to experience these acts of anti-Semitism on the one hand is, okay, as a people, we're familiar with that. We know that. We know the religion. We know the reasons grounded in hate and anti-Semitism. At the same time, though, it's supposed to motivate us to action, and it's supposed to motivate us to really reckon with what it means for someone to be persecuted for their identity, and what we as a community in different parts of the Jewish community, in different places, are struggling with that question a little bit. How to then then take that sense of meaning in persecution and suffering and injustice and relate and connect to other communities. Some parts of our community are doing it better than others, but I think it's a question, I'm being totally honest, I think it's a question we're working out right now, in vivo, as they say in Latin.
Well, thank you both for bringing us into that very challenging space. And I know for all of us here that we could spend the next 45 minutes just listening to the two of you, and we would walk away all the richer. But we also know that there's something about the collectiveness of community and all of us that are here, that it calls for us to speak with each other. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break into 4 breakout rooms. We're being very intentional about those breakout rooms. Each one of them will be led either by Liddy, Chaim, Sunita, or myself. And our goal is that each one of those rooms is very diverse. It has people from both the Christian community and the Jewish community in it. And we want to ask 3 questions because we think that what we just experienced calls for us to be reflective. And in the reflection, there's learning. So the 3 questions you can see side by side now are: what intrigued you in the conversation we just heard? What do you want to learn more about? And what could our communities do next? And know that for the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be in that conversation. And then we're going to come back together with the opportunity for the rabbi and the reverend to help us frame even more of what that's all about. So with that, I believe we're ready to go to our breakout rooms. And it should be that you're going to see something on the screen that says join breakout room. For example, I'm going to join room 2. Now I'm going to hit join. You do the same thing.
I think we all need to respect too that just because you're insular and don't want to be with other people, there are groups that are like that. It doesn't necessarily mean they don't like you or hateful of you, but there might be a fear factor of assimilation or losing your own culture, and we have to just try to distinguish maybe whether it's a feeling of hate or whether it's just a protectiveness. So maybe we have to just be empathetic to that as well, to some groups.
Thank you.
Well, it seems like we all joined into your breakout room, Chaim. So why don't we
Place
begin?
to be, I got to tell you.
You got a big enough table over there, I can tell, right?
Yeah. We're serving drinks. It's a whole big thing.
It's fantastic. So Chaim, why don't we begin with you? Can you give us a 1-sentence, 1-minute summary of what stood out for you in that conversation?
You're asking your rabbi to do something in 1 minute.
Listen, that's because we're brethren and we have Pittsburgh roots together, so
yes,
it's all
exactly.
Good. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna point out 2 things. One of the first speakers mentioned the word craving, and I'm not sure exactly if she meant it this way, but I really think right now, as we're at a certain stage in the pandemic, I can tell within our community there is a craving for connection, and I think everyone participating in this program, I think feels that sense and craves the opportunities to broaden those connections, so that they're more impactful. That's number 1. And number 2 is someone paraphrased something, a teaching from the rabbis. It's one of my favorite ones, so I have to share it. And in English, it goes like this: it's not up to you to finish the project, but you may not desist from it. And what that means is that there are some challenges that will always exist. People will always be different, and that will always create conflicts or missed connections. But even though we're never going to conquer difference, we still have to keep working at bridging our differences every single day.
Beautiful. Thank you. Liddy, do you want to give us a little synopsis?
Sure. So shout out to Breakout Room 1. You guys were great. I think our breakout room named three different possible next steps. And these are all just sort of approaches to continuing this intergroup journey in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And the first is education. The first is finding ways for us to learn more about each other and learning more about some of the history of the ways that our groups have interacted in the past. So that might be one possible tack. A second is relationship building, common experiences that form bonds of trust and understanding that then we can lean on when times are tough. And then the third is taking action together, identifying issues around which there might be, common concern, and doing some advocacy or doing some service together as a ways of building those bridges. So those are sort of three different approaches to doing this work, all of which found some advocates among the good folks of Breakout Room 1.
Fantastic. Sanita, would you like to share a little bit?
Sure. So my group was not as organized because we were just talking, but I think we got some really great nuggets there. One of the themes are actually something that I've heard already repeated. It's really about getting to know one another. We were very curious about one another's faith traditions and how we practice it. And I love that we had that people felt comfortable enough to ask those questions. So I think to what Reverend Liddy said, just getting to know one another, getting to learn more and more about one another's backgrounds and how we practice our faith, getting to know our neighbors. Literally are bumping up against each other, right? People live next door to each other, but they don't know each other. So how do we help get to know one another? And then one of the brilliant things that I think came out near the end was we have to acknowledge that this is a difficult conversation. And I think that that's really important, just to name that and to wrestle with it, to name the fact that this is going to be difficult, but we're all committed to it. And I like how Rabbi Popko named it said it earlier. We may not solve it, but let's be a part of the conversation. Let's be a part of making it happen. So that was group 4.
Thanks, Rev. And so I'll let you know that I think I'm in group 2, that there are 3 things that I would just lift up. One is, it began with a acknowledgement that what the two of you shared actually sounded a lot alike, right? There were threads that went through what you said that if we had more time, we could explore and really dig deeper into it. Maybe we will do that in a minute. The second is that this is not the type of thing that we should just do on an important day like Martin Luther King Day, right? Or at a church synagogue exchange day. And by the way, I was able to point out that today is not Martin Luther King Day. That's why we're doing this, right? So that we can actually do it at a time when we can actually build from it. And then the third thing is, I think it was Sandra shared, that it's not about just talking, it's about doing. And we have to find something to do, whether it was being together. I think it was in Teaneck that she pointed out after the death of the Asian women in Atlanta, and coming together as one community to mourn, right, and to demand justice, or a clothing drive, something where mutually we can be doing something together to engage in, so that the conversation can move along with the action. And I think that's key to building relationship. So I think what's probably best to do, Joshua, can you do us a favor? Can you spotlight the Reverend and the Rabbi? And I don't see any questions coming through yet. Naomi, am I correct at that? I'm not sure that you can unmute yourself, Naomi. So
the answer is yes. We do not have the questions coming in yet, but I am anticipating them flying in.
Understood. So in the meantime, let's just let the two of you have at it. Like, what do you want to talk about now? We got 15 minutes to go, 9 minutes to go, something like that.
So I want to jump in with something, because I think it's important, and I think it's really it's relevant, and I think it'll there's one thing among the suggestions, I forgot who said it, but the three things that we could be working on, education, relationship building, and activism. The first two, obvious to me: education and relationship building, common experiences. I think that's what we should focus on. I'll be honest, the activism, advocacy, I'm a little concerned about, because there are different kinds of advocacy. Anything that touches on anything anything slightly political might be difficult to bring people together. And I don't mean to sound like a wimp or anything, but I think when it comes to relationship building, there we can learn more about each other first. I mean, if it's advocacy for things that are just universal, fighting hunger, things like that, then for sure. But I think we just have to be clear about what advocacy means.
Yeah, I hear Reverend Pupko's. I hear the tension because it's difficult, right? We wrestle with it even in our congregation, even though we're explicit about how we stand, what we stand for about certain things, we still face those same challenges. And I think I think that sometimes advocacy comes out of relationship building, right? That like, as we get to know you, you're not just someone out there, you're actually my friend, right? You're actually someone I care about. And so it becomes personal for me. And it doesn't, sometimes I get a little frustrated that it has to be that way, but I think that that's so important. I think sometimes we discount the importance of relationships. There was a wonderful woman in our group, Linda, who talked about having a daughter-in-law is from the Philippines. And so hearing what happened in Atlanta hits her differently because there's a relationship there. And I think for all of us, as we think about, even with us, I think, Rabbi Pupko, like when we're texting in our group text about the holidays, just remembering those things, keeping in mind that I have a friend who is celebrating right now. I think that leads over time to advocacy because you're my friend and I don't want anyone to harm my friend.
That's very wise. That's very beautiful. Thank you.
I'm curious, Reverend Ponton, you mentioned that even in the church, there are issues that you can't touch in advocacy. Do you feel comfortable enough in this setting to let us know what one of those might have been in the past?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we from the pulpit, we talk about Black Lives Matter, and some people in the congregation are not happy about that. And we have taken a very strong stance on it. And some people don't agree. And so before my time, I've been at the church 3 years. Before my time, I heard that there were some people who left the church because of it. And I've had difficult conversations with people who don't agree or who think that based upon how they have come to understand their faith, that there should be a separation between what we call political or what is religious. And so those things shouldn't be talked about within, the church. That's not what our church believes. And we've tried to help teach people and help them understand why that's not what we believe. But they're still welcome, we don't turn people away, come, and we want to be a part of the conversation. And because we sharpen each other, right? So yeah. I have no qualms talking about it.
I'm curious, Reverend Ponton, if I can ask somewhat of a personal question, but what's that like for you to have a discussion with somebody about something like Black Lives Matter with someone who has an opposing view? What's that like for you?
It's difficult. I think I take on the role in the congregation as I try really hard to listen and to learn and to really help understand where someone else is coming from. And, oftentimes there is something that we agree on. We can always agree that people should not be getting killed, right? Like we can usually agree there. It's usually about whether or not the church should be talking about it or whether or not the way things should be handled a certain way. And so I try to at least get to the kernel of truth that we can all agree on. But it does hurt. I'm not going to lie and say that it doesn't hurt sometimes, but at the end of the day, I have to remind myself that this person loves God, I love God, and we might see the world differently, but I love, as we would say, I love the Jesus in them.
Rabbi, you ever have one of those days? Rabbi, you ever have one of those days?
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Something Reverend Ponton mentioned a couple comments ago. It's exactly in the Talmud that the jealousy of scholars increases wisdom, and when you use that word sharpen, that the discussions we have definitely help us to improve, to sharpen, to develop our thinking, and that's it's definitely what I take away from this evening.
So we had a question coming through the Q&A just about the diversity in this room, in this Zoom space, which is primarily Jewish, since we're bringing together 2 Jewish institutions and 1 Christian institution. But even within that, doesn't even necessarily reflect the full diversity of the Jewish community. For instance, we don't have any Jews of color in this space, and there certainly are Jews of color in the American community.
Although I do want to point out, I don't mean to put him on the spot, but he's a very special member of our community, Aaron Jordan, who is a person of color.
Hello, Aaron Jordan. I totally erased you, and I am very sorry for doing that. Thank you for being here. I want to think about the diversity in this room, because this also came up in my breakout room. Someone used the phrase, which often comes up in conversations like this, preaching to the choir. And I'm curious about how you experience moving from a conversation like this one with a self-selected group of people who wanted to spend their Monday night talking about diversity. How do we move from a conversation like this into that wider conversation with folks who might not be as open to engaging in this sort of discussion?
Very carefully.
Thanks.
How do we? It's an excellent question, and I think that's where education is important, and communication, and being able to speak in a way in which people find is not adversarial, and is not preaching, but I think the only way to really connect with someone is if there's a real sense of mutual respect. And so if I'm speaking about an issue which might land on people a little hard, it's as long as there's a trusting relationship, undergirding that that discussion. There have been times where people have said to me, "Listen, Rabbi, I know you, I love you, you're great. I don't agree with you on that." And that makes me feel great. The fact that someone can disagree with me and still feel that that sense of connection, that feels just as good than just people saying, "Oh yes, Rabbi, absolutely, you're absolutely right."
I would agree 100%. I think Rabbi Pupko, you said something earlier in the evening where you said being yourself, and knowing yourself, and then it allows you to kind of engage with other people. And I think we have to, for me, I hope people understand you're not going to lose yourself in these conversations. Hopefully it expands your mind, but the core of who you are should not change in these conversations. And yeah, they're difficult. And hopefully the more and more you talk about it, and not just us, right? But it's the people in the congregation too.
Yeah.
So let me throw one more out as we come to the end. Reverend Ponton, someone commented in the chat that at the church there are cliques based on the diversity. Can you confirm for that actually does happen?
That does happen. That does happen because we're not perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the question then is, Rabbi Pupko, does that happen in synagogue? In your synagogue?
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of our challenges, is that because we're so big, so we have a lot of communities within communities, and I mean there are people in my congregation who have never met other people in the congregation. and they can be like the same age. It's really remarkable. But I think in any social setting, I don't think this really has anything to do with religion per se. I think any social setting, we have. Is there someone who said like you can only have a certain number of relationships? I think some researcher once said that, right? So by definition, people are going to have the people that they're closest to and the people that they're not as close to. And I think being a leader, I'm sure Reverend Ponton will agree with me that it's our job to help create those opportunities for people to to reach beyond themselves and expand those circles, and so that everyone feels more connected.
Well, so here we are at 9:15. What a great way to spend a Monday night. And we're very grateful to you. I do want to let you know that aside from everything that came up in the breakout rooms, the last comment in the chat was a programmatic idea that I think you'll all both embrace, because I know that you have unending resources, which is that there should be a shared trip between teenagers from the church and the synagogue to Washington, D.C., to go both to the Holocaust Museum and Memorial and to the African American Museum as well. So you've got your marching orders. All you got to do is find the person that's going to write that check to make it happen. But we know that this type of work does not cost a lot of money. It costs a lot of effort. It costs a lot of soul. And I think that what you've presented to us tonight is an openness of soul, an openness of desire, a sense of what it means to be a neighbor in a way that that is refreshing for all of us. And I'll just speak personally before I hand it over to Liddy. I'm just so grateful that you invited us into this circle to listen to your conversation.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that from Ron, and my own gratitude to the Federation for hosting, to both of these faith communities for responding so enthusiastically to this invitation. What a rich evening of sharing. And it won't be the last. As we mentioned, as we started, this is just the first in this series of trust building through community conversations. And we hope that if you engaged with us this evening, that you will also participate in our upcoming series. We will let you know when the next one is scheduled. It's looking like probably July. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Dan to just say a couple final words as we say good evening.
Thank you, Reverend. I wanted to thank the reverends, the three reverends and the rabbi for this great, the two rabbis, sorry, two rabbis, two reverends for this great event. We're really happy all of you were able to attend. I do want to thank Ariella Novak, who couldn't be here, who really was responsible for putting this all together. She reached out originally to Liddy and to Ron, and then also to Chaim and to Sunita to get this together. So she had good news though. She had a baby, so we want to wish her a mazel tov on that. And I did once again want to thank all of you, and I hope you'll join us again. I know there were a lot of questions. We'll see if we can get those answered maybe outside the program. We'll see if we can do that. And we hope you do join us with this program, any other programs. And I wish you all a very good night and thank you again.
Thank you.